Hello, everybody. This is Bill Roden and another version of Bill Roden on sports. But before we get to that, my good friend and co-host Jamal Murphy has an announcement to make.
And it's an old announcement. BetOnline is, of course, our sponsor. BetOnline is the number one source for all of your betting needs. Get the latest odds, lines, and matchup reports for baseball, boxing, golf, and more. BetOnline continues to be the fastest and easiest way to place your wagers, including live betting and your favorite casino and card games available to play right from your phone. So head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and get to the action. Remember to use the promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet online, where the game starts. Back to you, Bill.
Thanks, Jamal. And that brings us to our first news story. The number of more NFL players have been suspended because of betting.
Yes. How about that?
Yeah, how about that? That clearly was not what we were going to talk about today, but I could not resist that yet another batch of NFL players has been suspended for betting. Why don't we bring in our special guest, and it's actually a friend of the show and an unofficial co-host, the great Glenn Woods, recently retired Judge Glenn Woods. We always call him the judge. He'll always be a judge. He'll always be the judge in our book. Once a judge, always a judge.
Very
because
true.
He can now sit in judgment of these types of things that we talk about on our show without having to, was it John Morant, guys getting kicked off because of gambling and anything. Judge Woods, welcome.
Thank you, Bill. It's always a pleasure. Thank you, Jamal. It's always I'm flattered always to be on and enjoy always being with you guys and looking forward to our discussion today.
Well, Jamal, we could deal with the NFL gambling later, but I'm just curious before we get into our conversation of the day, which is, of course, the Supreme Court's decision last week to basically dismantle affirmative action and his continued attack on freedom. What do you guys think just of the NFL, of these another wave of suspensions for betting? And the NFL clearly has gotten itself in bed with betting. What do you guys think about this?
Well, I mean, it's when you look at all that the NFL now is in bed with all these betting companies, it's definitely a part of the game. The NFL promotes it now. It's weird to see such harsh action taken against the players themselves for taking part in it, and that's whether they take part. It doesn't necessarily have to be them betting on their team's games or betting on football. If they bet in or around the facility on anything, they can get in trouble. And obviously, especially when it comes to the NFL and their own team, and a lot of people have made have noticed that these suspensions that they're getting for betting are much more harsh than, let's say, domestic abuse,
right?
And things like that. So it's definitely something worth talking about.
Well, I understand the concern that the league has, but there is some sort of contradiction that's going on here when, as you're saying, in the midst of games, literally you're sitting there and watching a game and they're promoting betting on the games.
Right.
But the players I understand the concern about the players betting, but it seems contradictory to me that the league takes such harsh stands against players who bet, yet the league also actually is a partner with these betting organizations.
Yeah. I think it's probably on some. I remember, Jamal, when we first started doing this podcast, maybe, I don't know, 2016 or something, and we were doing a read for DraftKings. And I think at the time I was with the Times, and I felt so squeamish about it that, I stopped doing the reads, probably mistakenly in retrospect. I probably should have done more. But we've gone from that to the league being, like you were saying, Glenn, totally in bed. And I do get this has all types of possibilities for corruption with players giving out information, who knows, heaven forbid, fixing games. So I guess I get it. And I suppose that maybe it's better to be harsher than have a big scandal when we find out that players are actually giving out information to gamblers. Though everybody's a gambler, right? You could give out information to anybody who's gambling, like to your relatives.
Right.
Somebody's more hurt than they say they're hurt. Somebody's more injured than they say they're injured. So I guess we'll just have to see how this.
And one of the guys, I can't remember who it was specifically, but one of the guys who recently got suspended by the NFL, that was one of the, it was like inside information. He usually just bet like $20 or $50 here or there, but then one particular day, I guess before the game, he bet $1,000 that one of his teammates would have over a certain amount of yards, or something like that. So he obviously knew that player was going to get carries that day.
Right.
Well, let's face it. The NFL, one of the reasons it is such a popular sport is the fact that betting has become totally immersed in the game.
Right.
And that is why the NFL has caught on so much, that gambling on games has been such a preoccupation in this country.
Well,
it's really made the game. It's really increased the popularity of the game.
Right.
And remember, at first, it was fantasy football.
Right.
That was the first step.
Right.
To get more people interested in football beyond just the X's and O's, and it worked. Fantasy football took off. And now when they finally decide, like you were saying, to make gambling really easy. Really easy. You could be in your bed. You could on your phone, you could bet numerous times during the game on a lot of different things.
Yep.
So.
And if you watch the games on TNT, for example, midway through the first quarter, Kenny and Charles get on there, and they're literally promoting gambling. So I think it's pie in the sky to think that. I think you almost have to expect that at some point there's going to be an issue with some of the participants in the game, the actual players, unwittingly or willfully becoming involved in betting to some extent, unfortunately.
And remember, a few years ago, probably more than that, Donaghy, the referee.
Yeah, Donaghy, yep.
Remember? And everybody was trying to paint him, the commissioner at the time, David Stern, God rest his soul, was saying, "Oh, this is just an isolated isolated incident," and but I don't know, man. I'm not sure where this is going to go. My concern is that sports is the one thing in our society, particularly the blood sports, like football, basketball, is the one thing you can kind of count on as being fairly, you get what you get what you see.
Right.
And I think Jamal, Glenn, before we got on, Jamal and I were joking about, and this will kind of lead into the Supreme Court decision, when people are just concerned, whenever, particularly Black folks, gain an edge, there's a counterforce to eliminate that edge, to somehow counteract it. And we are saying that, at least in sports, if you have people like Marjorie Taylor Greene or these right-wing Republicans, if every time their kid, let's say their kid plays Little League Baseball, and every time their kid strikes out or loses, they blame the umpire or they blame, the team's cheating. At some point, the parents will say, listen, you got to stop it. You got to stop it. Every time you fail, you're saying it's because of the umpire or you're saying they're cheating you. Get better. And it seems like, that type of thing is now, that's why I thought sports is somewhat pure, because at some point you have to take accountability. But it seems like we're in this context, particularly of a certain group of white people, is that whenever you don't get what you want, they're saying it's not your fault. It's not your fault that you're not getting what you want. It's the fault of black folks, or it's the fault of brown people. It's everybody's fault but yours. So I guess that kind of leads us into from gambling in the NFL to last week's Supreme Court's flurry of decisions. Dismantling affirmative action, or at least using race as a criteria, siding with the people in, I guess, Colorado who did not want to make the same-sex website.
Right. Student loans.
Student loans. I mean, it's on this roll. But Glenn, just as a former judge, as somebody who had to go through law school and all that, just your thoughts about the Supreme Court decision about affirmative action, particularly race-based affirmative action.
Well, when I was in law school, I was thinking back on this. When I was in law school, the Bakke decision came about, which established the affirmative action, which was to right the wrongs of the past via the 14th Amendment. Now the 14th Amendment has been turned on its head, and it's been used to end affirmative action. My feeling is, of course, that the court was wrong in both instances, at Harvard and at University of North Carolina, that we still need to right the wrongs of the past, that the preferential treatment that is allegedly there for Black students needs to continue, and that the court is simply wrong. That via the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause, 14th Amendment, there still is a need for admissions offices in colleges to act affirmatively for the benefit of Black children. I think it's that simple. I worry about this. The schools let's put it this way. There's been a question even now whether how affirmatively many of the schools are acting anyway, because relatively small numbers of kids of color in these schools, particularly Black males. But to do away with the actual law that enforces this affirmative action is a great concern to me. It is really the only affirmative action program that's being done away with. We're continuing to have legacies. We're continuing to have affirmative action for athletes. If for example, you want, if your school is in Massachusetts and you want more kids from Iowa or Michigan, you can continue to do that. If you need more women, even though now women, there are a higher percentage of women in college than men, but if you find that your incoming class needs more women, you can still say, okay, let's go get more women to bring them in. But you cannot say, if you feel there is a dearth or a paucity of Black students in your upcoming class, now you cannot specifically, individually, directly say, we're going to bring in a certain number of Black kids.
But presumably, couldn't somebody? I'm sorry, Jamal. Couldn't somebody take this to? I want to go back to the sports piece you were talking about because I'm thinking that could be next. But couldn't somebody, a male who was passed over, couldn't he take them? When because the school said we want more women, or we want more people from Iowa, and I'm from Illinois. Couldn't somebody presumably, again, take that to court?
Well, we'll have to see the contours of the decision. We'll have to see. That might be the next proving ground. That might be the next area where the case is taken. There is a concern for programs now, for example, medical schools that are seeking to bring in more Black young people into medical school. Will it affect them? Things of that nature. We'll have to see where people will take the decision in the future as they press their cases. It is very possible that a group of male plaintiffs might say, look, we're finding that you, XYZ school, are affirmatively acting on behalf of women. And we feel that wronged by that. It is possible that is where we'll go. We'll have to see. This is new ground. The 14th Amendment, which was initially drawn to help people of color, is now being used to harm their interests, and it is a real concern.
I was thinking about this, affirmative action, this case, and to me, it's almost like they're exploiting, they're the right wing group trying, that have been trying to get right wing groups that have been trying to get rid of affirmative action for decades, but they're exploiting the written rule, and it almost seems like the unwritten rule is stronger, right? Because you can't really point to it. You can't point to anything that's written down that says that's discriminatory towards people of color. That there's no more written rule that says we're not, we have a preference for white people in our colleges. There's nothing written down that says that. It's just the evidence, right? It's just, you can just look at the numbers and see that that only 5 to 6% of African Americans were being admitted in during affirmative action, right? But they can look to the written rule and say, hey, that's discriminatory. Why are you looking at one group? Why are you, taking one group away from the others and saying that it's more important that they get an education? But while we know that the unwritten rule is that, it is more important for these white people to get an education, and it has been throughout history. But there's nothing, but because that's not written in stone anymore, and it's just done by actions. We can't prove that anymore, if that makes any sense.
Well, the thing that concerns me is that I think many people think that there is a 1-for-1 zero-sum game, meaning if I have a college and Jamal's kids are applying, one of his children is applying, it doesn't work where it's not a situation where the college is saying, okay, we're going to admit Jamal's son, but that means that a white person who is applying will be automatically eliminated. It doesn't work that way. Right. What they're saying is we are looking to diversify, to integrate, to have a cross section of America in our incoming class. So we need to find students just as who are Black, just as if we needed to find kids from the West Coast, because all of our applicants are local, and we want to expand our applicant base. It's not a one for one thing. It's a more of a general approach of trying to expand the applicant pool so it reflects the country. Without it, colleges such as UCLA and Michigan, and colleges in Michigan where they have disbanded these affirmative action rules and laws, have had a heck of a time having diversification in their incoming student classes. There really is no other, there is not, let me put it this way, it is the best way to have to integrate your incoming class, to diversify your incoming class, is to have a plan and a program that says we need to bring kids of color in.
But even but let's just. But even if, what if you just wanted to say, we want the best kids, we want the most talented, we want the best kids, the kids with the most potential. We want all of those kids in our school. There's no way you can tell me that a certain percentage of those kids would not be African American, people of color. They would, that would be true. But what's the criteria, right? So and I don't I don't think anywhere is they say that we strictly go by test scores, or we strictly go by grades. They take colleges are supposed to take everything into account, essays, everything, right? So
except race.
Before they were allowing race, but the purpose of that was because throughout history, they weren't they were looking at race to exclude people of color, right? That's why affirmative action came about, because before it was a detriment to be a person of color and
to right the wrongs of the past.
Right, to right the wrongs of the past. So it's almost like we had to force them to even consider Black people.
Right. Well, you've got George Wallace on camera. You've got all these people on camera. George Wallace standing in front of the schoolhouse door saying segregation now, segregation forever.
Right.
You got Lester. I mean, you've got anecdotes. You've got scores of biographies by African Americans who said that they wanted to go to this school, but that school was not accepting Blacks at that time. You could probably get a pile of those types of stories of Black people saying they were denied because they were Black. So I mean, I guess it's frustrating because you also have people now, there's a group of people now denying even that, denying that past history of slavery had anything to do. I just think about this, about people, remember the stories of Black folks who had land and these white people showing up on their doorsteps and murdering them and just taking their land. Right. The red line, the bank, I mean, all the stuff that happened to basically keep Black people at a disadvantage. And it was systemic. I mean, that's the definition of racism. It was systemic. The banks not loaning, educational systems being segregated, not admitting people. Let me ask you this. Do you think, I go back to, who's the great running back who went to Alabama, who's now a star with the Tennessee Titans?
Derrick
Henry. So let's because I was thinking of writing a piece about how they're going to come after intercollegiate athletics next, particularly basketball and football at these Power 5 conferences, which are the elite football, athletic conferences. Can people now the same group of people who filed suit against Harvard and North Carolina, can they now put their eye on athletes saying, you know what, I didn't get into University of North Carolina, but these 3 basketball players who were also in my class did get in. Now, I know my scores were better than theirs. I know my rank was higher than theirs, and I know my board scores were better. Why should they get in and I don't get in? Do you think that there could be an argument to begin going after the athletic scholarship?
It's possible. Anything is possible.
Right.
To see where this leads us as far as legal action.
Yeah, there's always an argument.
You can always it can always be argued, but I think I want to go back to what Jamal was saying, and what the pro affirmative action people were saying was that colleges, whether it's North Carolina or it's Harvard or University of Connecticut or the SUNY system in New York, you can continue to get the best students, but history is now showing that you will have a difficult time retaining a cross section of the society and having that as a part of your admissions process, a part of your student body, unless you specifically go out and look for Black students the way you look for piano players in your orchestra or violinists in your orchestra or cheerleaders or more women to diversify your incoming class. It's not a zero-sum game where just because my white neighbors' kids didn't get into Harvard and my Black neighbors' kids did, it's not something where the Black kids got in and those white parents' kids did not. It's a matter of being able to diversify, to go out and target, just as you would target a violinist for the orchestra at the University of North Carolina or at Harvard. It's not a one-on-one competition for getting in. It really isn't.
Think of all the Black kids who can't get into Harvard or North Carolina. Think about that.
Exactly. And we're looking for a meritocracy in these admissions processes. They're not. First of all, it's something like only 1 out of every 10 applicants get into the elite schools. And they get in for a variety of reasons. Now the Supreme Court is saying, despite there are a variety of reasons, whether it's legacy, whether it's because you're a musician or a writer or an actor, or have a special science skill, or can run the 100 in under 10 seconds, you can do those, but we are not going to make a special track for you if you are Black. And that is, I contend it's still discriminatory on its face.
Yeah, and going to your point, bringing sports into it. Well, first, when I think of the sports dynamic, now I'm thinking of just the way the campus will look. These campuses will look. It already looked a lot like it. Majority of the Black and brown people on campus were athletes. When I was in school at Guilford College, in Greensboro, North Carolina, and we were in the cafeteria and all the Black people ate together, and I swear about 80% of us were there because we played a sport. Okay, so it already looked like that. So now, without affirmative action, what's it going to look like? The only African Americans on campus, or especially Black males on campus, are going to be athletes. And is that what they want? And the reason why I don't think they'll go after with and I agree with the judge in terms of you never know. You know, there's an argument for everything. If they want to go at that, they can. But the reason I think that they'll be hesitant is because of all the money that is made from these black athletes and all the money that these schools get because of those athletes. They won't want to get rid of them, but they're willing to get rid of the regular student. You know, they're willing for the regular student to be, you know, to have little diversity. They don't care about that part of it.
Well, I mean, with the Derrick Henry example, you know, Judge, you were talking about, you know, somebody could look at Derrick Henry and say, and the white student to get in, it said, he is making us millions of dollars. You are not. You're costing us money. He's making us money.
Right.
You know. But do you remember the case? Matter of fact, we should have had Tommy Amaker on. I remember 15 years ago when Amaker, whenever he first got to Harvard, and he began bringing in these really athletic black guys. And I remember there was this furor. In fact, a then associate editor at the Times, she was pissed because one of her neighbor's sons didn't get into Harvard. And they were trying to call Amaker on the carpet, saying you're bringing in these guys, you know, and they don't fit the profile, you know, of the rest of the students. So, you know, even then, it was like an issue. I mean, you know, it's like
I'm losing a little, Bill. What you were saying about the editor, the streaming seemed to be off just a bit.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Can you repeat that about the editor?
Yeah,
what she said.
This white editor had her neighbor had wanted to go to Harvard and did not get in, and they began to mount a crusade against Amaker because he has started bringing in some really talented basketball players. You know, not just sort of your run-of-the-mill players. And their argument was that you're bringing in these black guys, automatically assuming that they weren't qualified. Right. You know, and there was an uproar of these kids because their kids didn't get in, but these black guys did get in to play, you know, to play sports, to play basketball. So well, I guess.
Can I say something? My brother played football at Harvard, and he said back then that same mentality existed. And let's see, he's about 65 years old now. He said when he was there, that same mentality existed as the person you referred to, Bill. But he said people didn't realize that half the white guys there were there because they knew somebody.
Right.
Half the white guys on the football team at Harvard were there not because they were great students, but because they knew somebody. Right. And this is the fallacy.
Right.
That,
and Bill, I just want to say, you hit it on the head when you said that black people they're looked at automatically as unqualified. That's the problem. If you're black and you're at one of these schools or at any school for that matter, you're looked at as unqualified, and that you had help, and that you're an affirmative action student. Even that term is ridiculous. You're an affirmative action student. Barack Obama was calling himself an affirmative action student. Now we all know the person that Barack Obama has become. Okay, and you're going to tell me that he was unqualified anywhere, but they still refer to you as affirmative action. You know, Clarence Thomas. I mean, he may have been unqualified based on what he's done after the fact, but I mean, you know, he's an affirmative action guy. I mean, all these people who've gone on to achieve heights like unknown, that have surpassed, you know, their white peers. They were unqualified, you know, and they continue to do this. You know, well, every black kid in school is an affirmative action. You know, is there because of affirmative action. So what does that say about affirmative action?
Well, I think that to speak to Bill's point, I think that that person who he knew who was upset about Amaker's players had, based on what I know about athletics at Harvard from my own family experience, she had more of a claim or concern from the white athletes at the school because there were
Right.
so many more of them
Right.
who, according to my brother, those guys shouldn't have been there.
Right.
You know, and I should say that my brother was admitted to Yale and Amherst also, so he was not not someone who shouldn't have been there. But this is the danger when you get into this. This zero-sum game of my kid didn't get in, but that black kid got in.
Right.
It's not that cut and dried. It's not that simple. It's a matter of going out and getting people who will be successes in the society, who will add to the cross-section of the incoming class so that it reflects the society in general. Let me just say one other thing to my man, Bill Roden, because as far as the Amaker goes, you got to get him on there, Bill, one day for the reasons we talked about over the summer, which I don't want to get into now. And you have a special way to get Tommy Amaker in there. So, Mr. Amaker, if you're listening, get on this show.
I'll reach
sure
out.
Jamal might know. I'll tell him afterwards, but I think that would make for an interesting show. But I have a high regard for Tommy Amaker. He is really one of the leaders in coaching now. He's done it the right way. He's a symbol who has not been treated properly in recent times. And I like the way he's done it at Harvard as far as getting these kids in. And Bill and I know, Bill knows better than I, that he is quite a guy. And he's someone who could really speak to this issue, particularly the great issues that you two guys are bringing up about where is this taking us with sports? Because I think at the Alabamas, at the LSUs, at the University of Missouri's, at the UCLA's, that you'll get 60-70% participation of men of color in these programs, and you'll probably get barely double digits of men who are not athletes being admitted into the school in general.
Right. And going back to your zero, it's not a zero-sum game. That's obvious, right? Everybody knows that except for the parents who are being used in these type of lawsuits by, I think Edward Bloom, I think it's Students for Fair Admissions. It goes back to what Bill was saying about, always claiming that there's cheating going on because your kid isn't successful. Your kid doesn't get into Harvard. It's not because of one black athlete that got in or one black non-athlete that got in. You're probably not going to get in anyway. And I think the people, like Edward Bloom know that. They're just using those cases for their ultimate goal, which has been to, keep colleges white. I mean, it's not we've had Trump as president. People, they're saying this stuff out loud now. Like, we don't even have to pretend like that's not the reason. People are saying this stuff out loud. So it's almost like those kids, the Asian kids who brought this suit. Affirmative action was helping them also. They were being accepted at greater rates already than African Americans were. Okay, so this is not going to help them. This is helping Edward Bloom and the right wing.
Well, I also think when I read about this and listen to the discussions in the media about this, fundamentally, people have to vote.
Oh yeah,
if people voted in presidents and senators and Congress people who would who have the power and the authority to get people on the bench if they voted and didn't vote for Republicans, we wouldn't have these presidents who and these senators who make certain that conservative Republicans get into these significant judicial positions. It's
And
it's that fundamental.
right,
Vote.
and these same people, including Bloom himself, are attacking that too. They're trying to attack the vote,
That's right.
the voter turnout, and all of that. So it's really the
Because
same
they
people.
know.
Right.
Because they know. Yeah.
Right, and it's all part of this of a systematic attempt to turn everything back to the way it was.
What's your thought about the Supreme Court? Uh, you know, I know it's a very open-ended question, but it's taken such a beating, not only from these conservative rulings, but the disclosures about what Clarence Thomas, the gifts and the trips, and what at you as a judge, and I'm not sure how you looked at the Supreme Court as you were going up through law school, and then the judgeship, as opposed to how you look at it now. Has your view of the Supreme Court changed?
Well, I see that the gifts that Alito, Thomas, Gorsuch have benefited from, and I can say that in Connecticut there was noticeable scrutiny on members of the bench to avoid any sort of activity such as what Justice Thomas was involved in. I don't recall that being an issue at all. I think that my colleagues, some of whom I wasn't necessarily on the same page with, I think I would say virtually all of them that I'm aware of played it by the book and acted appropriately and didn't accept that sort of largesse and moved ahead appropriately. I'm disappointed that at some of the stories we've heard, Justice Alito wrote, I guess it was in the Wall Street Journal, a response to the report that came out. I think it was ProPublica.
Yeah, ProPublica. Yeah.
Yeah, that about his behavior. It's unfortunate. I didn't see it in the Connecticut judicial system. Doesn't mean it didn't exist, but I didn't see it. I'm disappointed. And it's unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, in the couple of minutes we have left, let's talk about the second issue. Of course, tomorrow's Independence Day, and I forgot what the hell our second topic was.
Baseball.
Oh, baseball. Yeah. You could edit that, Jamal. Speaking of blackouts, I'm headed to Seattle on Wednesday. Major League Baseball is sponsoring, in conjunction with Ken Griffey Jr., what they call the Swingman Classic All-Star Game, involving a number of HBCU teams with their baseball program in an All-Star Game in an ongoing effort to, I guess, increase numbers in baseball. Ironically, a number of these players will be white and Hispanic, because I guess colleges, HBCUs, are having the same problem attracting players as Major League Baseball. And I wonder what you guys think about that. I was having this conversation with an HBCU president the other day, complaining about you're going to have all these white guys playing baseball, these HBCUs and Hispanic guys. And he brought up a good point in that, just like, at these PWIs, the predominant number of players are going to be black who are playing basketball, football. That's because they're better, but not in baseball, because for reasons that we've discussed, there the infrastructure of producing black baseball players is not there. So you're right. If you have a baseball program at an HBCU, many of the players may be white and many of them may be Hispanic. What do you guys think about that? And do you think that we'll never really get back to a meaningful presence in baseball in terms of a black presence in baseball?
I think baseball generally has lost its appeal to Americans in general. I think soccer and basketball are really, well, internationally, soccer and basketball are the most popular sports. In America, with our violent, society, football appears to be the most popular. But it appears that, just speaking of America in general, baseball has lost its the appeal that it had, Bill, when we were kids. And it might have been in the time that Jamal was a kid that baseball has not been so popular. In the African American community, I'm very disappointed that the numbers are in Major League Baseball have gone from a high of almost 20% participation by black players to fewer than 7% of the game now. It's about 5 or 6% of the game of Major League Baseball are black. The last year's World Series, there was not one black player on either roster. And my concern is that, for example, the thing that you're going to, which is great, Bill, in the next few days, it's Ken Griffey that's behind that.
Yeah.
And
Junior.
And my concern is that the Major League system, the general baseball system, whether it's Major League, minor league, college, AAU, American Legion, Little League, is not interested, generally speaking, is not interested in the participation of black kids. And it might be for the reason, Bill, that you said at the outset of the show, that we're too darn good. They're tired of Hank Aaron and Ernie Banks and Willie Mays and Bob Gibson and Reggie Jackson. Man, they don't want to hear that anymore. Yeah. And maybe that's it. I'm not sure. But I really think there is an indifference in the baseball, general American baseball system. There is a systemic indifference to bringing in black kids in a sport that is I don't want to say dying, but is not as popular anymore. And that's kind of the way I see it, that the effort is not there. The people who usually are wanting to integrate and to bring in black kids are the Ken Griffeys. And God rest his soul, Joe Morgan worked his tail off to integrate the game. And I don't see it. I don't see. I don't see baseball itself taking the initiative to bring in black kids. I get all this stuff about, well, it's easier to pick up a basketball and have play 3-on-3 than it is to go to a field and get all the equipment and all that stuff. I get that, but I don't see the initiative for bringing black kids into the game unless it's done by the Ken Griffeys and the Bill Rodens and the Jamal Murphys of the world. I don't see it. Forgive me for being so firm about it, but
yeah, I agree.
I agree. I think you hit on all of the many issues. I agree that in general, baseball is kind of falling off, that there's less interest generally from Americans, in baseball. I have a young kid. He's about to turn 9. He wants to play baseball. He says, I want him to play baseball, but then, he's more interested in flag football. He's more interested in basketball. And now, unlike in the past, both of those games are kind of year round, right? So if you enjoy basketball and football even a little more, you're gonna, now there are programs where you can keep playing them. It doesn't have to be just in season, right? You can keep playing those sports, and and the summer is the time where kids are out of school.
And
right?
let me say this. I don't. Baseball, of the three major sports, it's unfortunate because baseball is the most playable.
Exactly.
Meaning, in basketball, man, you have to be successful. You got to be a freak now. You have to be at least 6'6", 6'7",
Right,
6'8".
right.
And in football, the game is so darn violent that
You got to be a freak in
really
that
have
too.
to question whether you want your children involved. Baseball, you can be 5'9" or 5'8"
Right.
and be real good. But basketball, if
I think that
you
goes to your
want to go
point.
anywhere,
I think that goes to your
you
other
have
point
to.
of why there's no, concerted effort to bring black kids into the game, because I think a lot of white parents feel like, hey, this is the one sport where my kid can succeed. So why would I want to bring in competition? Right.
Exactly.
And I've heard stories from I have friends who have black children who actually played baseball, and they're in college, minor leagues, that type of thing. And they talk about, during whatever it is, the AAU of baseball, like the baseball leagues, high school leagues, it's very rare you'll have one black guy. He has to be a power hitter, on the team. There's comments in the stands, like they're not. It's not a place that's a comfortable setting right now for young black kids to make it in baseball.
And it's so expensive. I mean,
Right.
baseball is a tremendously expensive sport. But I kind of get back to what you were saying, Glenn, about the appetite. I think baseball has become sort of a white player's oasis. That's the one sport where the American white kid can dominate. And I think they'll concede the Hispanic presence. They'll concede the Latin presence. Okay, we'll concede that. But I think that there's not an appetite for making baseball look like the NBA or the NFL. And I think soccer in this country has the same issue. They're kind of coming around a little bit, but I think soccer too didn't really have an interest in this country of making it look like the NBA or the NFL. I think that you're absolutely right. But I think you were saying you didn't think cost had that much to do with baseball.
No, I don't. I hear that. I mean, you say that, Bill, and our good friend Doug always tells me that, and I hear that from other friends. I don't think I don't think that has any. I'll concede that is an issue, but it's secondary in nature.
And also, all these sports, once these kids are moving up in the and all these sports, once they're moving up through the ranks and trying to make it to become a college player and a pro player, all these sports get expensive. Like AAU basketball is expensive. The parents have to go travel with the kid and get hotel rooms every weekend and all that kind of stuff. Same football is the same. I do hear that baseball is even more expensive because you have the equipment.
Yes.
I had a friend tell me he spent something like close to $20,000 on baseball, which sounds crazy. So baseball is probably more expensive, but I hear complaints about the expenses from all the sports.
Yeah, I think you're right, and that's actually something to talk about later. At what point? I don't know if it was on your podcast, Jamal, you and Khalid. That basketball, the stereotype of basketball was that it was a poor man's sport.
Right.
You could just go on the playground and all that. But it seems like across the board, it's all becoming expensive. Unless you were like really tremendously, if you're great, if you're Zion, then there are these exceptions. And I'm just wondering if a lot of people are going to get priced out. A lot of young people, young families are going to be priced. It's going to become a middle to upper middle class sports scenario, unless your kid just happens to be exceptional. But I do think, Glenn, to your point, baseball's making all these noises about trying to recruit more young black kids and all that. I just don't necessarily see it happening unless now I know Howard, Major League Baseball was supposed to be throwing some money at Howard to start a baseball program, but one of the presidents said don't throw it at Howard, throw it to the MEAC, throw it to the conference, and let each school develop programs, but not only programs in college, but develop programs that are for like 9 and 10-year-olds.
Yeah, grassroots. Yep.
Grassroots programs. So that, because that's what the Negro Leagues did, right? They were an echo structure in the black community. Baseball was part of our community. And when that was removed, that echo structure was removed. Has never really been replaced. So I don't know.
I think that it has to become, as I call it, system-wide. From Major League right to Little League, there would have to be a concerted effort to say, we're going to affirmatively act to bring in to bring in black kids, and I don't see that happening. I don't know. I don't hold out a lot of hope for baseball. And as I said, the backdrop to baseball is, though, that the American society in general doesn't pay as much attention to the game as it used to when we were younger. And this might, I don't know, Jamal, this might predate you. The extreme interest. I can remember October 2nd, 1978, when the Red Sox played the Yankees for a one-game playoff to get to the playoffs.
Right.
The country stopped.
Right.
Certainly the East Coast, but the country in general stopped. They had a special national telecast of the game on ABC. I'll never forget it. I rushed home from law school at 2:30 in the afternoon. That was when baseball was king. It was 1978.
I feel like, I grew up in the 80s with the Mets. And in baseball, I felt was still, Dwight Gooden, Strawberry.
Right. Yeah. And
baseball was still pretty popular at that point. Yes. But I think right when you got to the 90s, it tailed off, and people stopped caring. And I don't know, I guess you still had the Yankees doing things, but I mean, on a national level, it just didn't seem as popular as it was, in the mid 80s, mid to late 80s.
Look at ESPN and its coverage now. It is thirsting for every breath from Damian Lillard.
It's crazy
to cover that, because baseball is not that popular. It doesn't bring in the companies to advertise, so that's your backdrop to a game that I submit doesn't have the reasonable interest to bring in black kids.
And when you're talking about, the league, MLB and baseball having to, act affirmatively to bring kids in, it just sounds weird to me. Like it's a sport, right? Usually kids, you don't, you tell me, did football ever have to do that? Did basketball ever have to affirmatively reach out to black kids, or did they just play? It just sounds weird that there needs to be an initiative.
Well, if they're interested, if
there needs to be interest.
There needs to be,
but there needs to be interest from the kid, right?
Yeah. Well, kids aren't going to follow the sport if they don't see people who look like them playing the sport,
right?
And they don't see it now,
right? And they don't see their parents watching it on TV. They don't see their parents, hooting and hollering about, like they do basketball and football. Right. That's why the kids play.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think it'll be a fascinating dilemma. I like Seattle. the city. So it'll be fascinating. But I agree with both of you that I think that the ship has sailed in terms of because football, basketball control the pipeline of black kids. They own that pipeline, in a way that baseball relinquished, and they're not going to get it back. Anyway, any final?
That's my
go ahead.
Baseball has actively, fully and purposely. Maybe I'm wrong in saying this. Relinquished it.
I don't think. I don't think you're wrong. It's almost like benign neglect,
right?
That you look up and you say, well, again, you've got it's become a global sport. You've got, probably of all the major sports, it's probably the one sport where the American white player, can dominate. But you've also got, Japanese stars. You got tons of South American, Central American stars. They said, well, do we really need black athletes?
Right.
What do they add? Where in basketball, football, said we run on black athletes. So.
And it's funny. I mean, to that point, who did I see saying that baseball was his favorite sport? But Ron DeSantis, he had an interview on Fox News.
Well, he played baseball at Yale.
He said, and he was saying, well, baseball. Baseball is much better than basketball. Basketball, you need to be a freak. He said this. You need to be a freak athlete. Football, same thing. He was like, baseball, is the sport that every kid can play. Every kid can find a spot, no matter what. And then once I saw that, I was like, okay, I see where we are with that.
Yeah. I think he was captain of the team at Yale.
Yeah.
He must have been an affirmative action.
Right.
Affirmative action player. Yeah. Hey, any last thoughts before we, dismiss class? Tomorrow is Independence Day, kind of ironically enough, given what's happening in the country, where people are trying to snatch your independence as we speak. Any thoughts about tomorrow's holiday?
My only thought is one of. It's not necessarily a positive one. I am, now that I have more time, maybe it's because I'm not working anymore and I'm retired and I have more time to view and peruse. I'm distressed at how separate a country we are now, how distant we are from each other now, how whether it's racially distant, whether it's the terrible treatment of the LGBTQ plus community, whether it's the treatment of migrants, whether it's the treatment of the poor. As we hit the 4th of July, I don't think that's what was intended when we developed this country, that we would be so broken apart. It's distressing to me. And I worry about where we're going, particularly with some of the Republican candidates that I see now. If they were successful, what the heck would happen, but that's what hits me is just how divided a country we are on so many issues, just in sports. The issue of Joker for Denver and how that was dealt with this winter. It was really a point of contention. The guy can play. He's a great player. Bill wrote a great column on it, fabulous column on it, which I think hit the nail on the head. He's a great player, but whoa, let's pull up. Is he there with Kareem and Russell and Wilt yet? After a couple of years,
one championship.
And that, I think, spoke to the divisions that we have in America today, which are extreme and extraordinary, which are not getting addressed.
Didn't you say, Jamal, that I was taking the task for that?
Oh yeah, just for bringing it up. Whenever you bring anything up, I think it was Isola, Frank Isola took you to task for that, for just writing the piece.
Right.
I don't even know if he read it.
Yeah. What do you mean? Well, anyway, what do you think, Jamal, as we head into Independence Day? July 4th.
Enjoy the fireworks. That's all.
Oh, you guys are funny. All right. Well, hey, Judge, thank you so much, man, for joining us. Always.
Well, thank you. As I said, I'm always flattered that you have me on. I listen, and as Bill knows, I read all the time. When we go off, Jamal, you got to give me the name of that podcast that you guys do, your podcast, so I can listen to it. I can drive my wife crazy while we're driving on the road, and I listen to a podcast.
Another podcast,
the sports podcast,
another one that I can drive her crazy with.
Yeah.
Thank you guys. This is always a pleasure. I'm flattered and terribly impressed by both of you guys and your accomplishments.
All right, Glenn, thanks so much, man. It's always great having you on.
Yes, thank you.
Jamal, you hang in there. You got these two young aspiring athletes who are going to cost you hundreds of thousands of bucks. We didn't mention John Morant and parents. That may be our next show. John Morant and the role of parents in not becoming their kids' employees. So
it's tough.
Well, you wrote a great column on that, Bill, with Janet, the late Janet Hill. I think you hit that one on the head, but Jamal will find that out personally.
That's right.
Along here.
That's right. Fire the coach. I can't wait to the same thing when you want to get rid of the coach, and maybe you will become the coach.
Hey, I try to stay out of it. You're gonna have to deal with all kind of coaches, so get used to it. Get used to the bad ones. You gotta deal with them too.
Good luck with that.
Make you stronger, hopefully.
We'll see. All right, everybody. Listen, enjoy the 4th of July, and to our hundreds of thousands of listeners, be safe. We'll hit you back with another podcast next week. Continue to pray.
Yes.
Pray.
Or you can bet also. We're brought to you by Bet Online. Don't forget.
You can pray or you can bet. And all our best to CC, Glenn.
Thank you very much. Happy 4th, everyone.
All right, take care. God bless.